Many people consider math to be a universal language, but in reality, it's not. From the book The Problem with Math is English, we found an excerpt that shows a perfect example of how students can have problems in math. Find the arglyph of a napkin if the Betzodin is 12. Try as you will, but the problem has you stumped. You finally give up, make a guess, and move on to the next problem. Unfortunately, you come across 14 other test items that confuse you in similar ways. Once again, the best you can do is guess at the answers. Later, you find out you did not pass the exam primarily because of those 15 items. When most people hear or see the term mathematics, the initial thoughts that come to mind are numbers, computation, rules, and procedures. However, the root cause of the student's inability to find the arglyph of a napkin if the Betzodin is 12, is not because of a lack of knowledge of computation rules or procedures. If the strange terms arglyph, napkin, and Betzodin meant area, circle, and diameter, respectively, the question would become the following. Find the area of the circle if the diameter is 12. However, if the students do not know the meaning of area, circle, and diameter, the terms might as well be arglyph, napkin, and Betzodin because they still hold no meaning. This scenario is a rudimentary example of the key role that language plays in the understanding of mathematics. The student's difficulty is not in reading English, but in understanding the language of mathematics, and it makes no difference whether the student is fluent in English or not. A language problem still exists. Although perhaps not obvious, language is as critical in mathematics as in any other discipline. Moreover, the role of language in mathematics entails far more than vocabulary definitions, encompassing a broad landscape of language-based issues.
In South America and many European countries, instead of using commas, they use the period in place of a comma. This is a prime example of how language is not a problem, but the understanding of language in mathematics is. An example would be 1,000, as shown here on the PowerPoint. Also, a majority of the world uses the metric system instead of the standard system, which the United States uses. This causes confusion in the classroom for ELL students who are learning both language and the new mathematical systems at the same time. Even division problems are written differently in different countries. Look how 25,000 divided by 5 is written in the US compared to Haiti. Many people assume that the use of math symbols is culture-free and ideal for facilitating the transition of immigrant students into English instruction, but we have learned that this is a myth. In the typical American classroom, there is a routine discourse pattern that most students follow. The pattern that is normally followed would be that the teacher asks a question that has one correct answer. The student responds, the teacher provides feedback of correct or incorrect responses, and then the teacher asks another question and repeats the process. This type of questioning usually does not elicit higher order thinking because the questions have a straightforward answer that is known to the teacher, so the questions do not promote oral language and written language development, thus stifling academic language development in the classroom. Academic language is both generic and content-specific and represents the entire range of language used in academic settings. If you haven't noticed already, in the background of our presentation, the Ghostbusters theme song has been playing. Our theme for this project is to bust myths, like the Mythbusters, but to also eradicate the misconception the world has about math, just like the Ghostbusters eradicated ghosts in New York. We thought we would show how much fun we had researching for this project and how we are math nerds through the theme of this project.
Our group's project goal was to look at the language of mathematics by proving math is not a universal language. We want to research the challenges of language that is faced in mathematics because many people think that math is universal since it only deals with numbers. The numbers may be all the same all over the world, just using different words, but does not mean that all of math is the same all over the world. We break down common myths about mathematics because we think that there are many misconceptions coming from the student's perspective of mathematics, and they all relate back to language.
One of the first and most common myths in math is that math is just vocabulary and that's all you need. This is a huge misconception and needs to be set straight once and for all. When people hear the language of mathematics, they automatically think of a list of vocabulary or specialized words in the math content area with explicit meanings. According to Judith Moskovich of the University of California, Santa Cruz, the language of mathematics should be the communicative competence necessary and sufficient enough for complete participation in math discourse practices. An example of a math discourse is if-then statements. No other subject area says, if this happens, then this will happen, because, for example, in social studies, the event has already occurred. In math, you need to be able to communicate, and yes, vocabulary is involved in communication, but this isn't the only thing needed. The instructions communicated need to support both the vocabulary and math concepts. Knowing this, we as teachers need to stop ourselves from choosing vocabulary drill as an effective instructional practice, because there are many other ways to teach vocabulary other than just drilling it into the students' heads. Instead, we need to use vocab acquisition that happens more often in instructional contexts and has the characteristics of being rich in language and making sure to keep the students actively involved in the language as well. So through ways of repeating activities where the teacher and students go back and forth to learn vocab, or having the students try their best to use the word or words in sentences throughout discussions. Even trying to implement TPR, or total physical response, could help students learn vocab better than just drilling. TPR consists of physical movement and motions that go along with one type of word or topic. Students also need to be taught that they need to be taking in the language as well as expressing the language to have a better understanding. As I stated before, students need to talk with the vocab and use it daily to ensure that it is comprehended. Using tools such as word walls, where someplace in the classroom categories are put up, such as the first letter of the word, or in math it could be what word fits with a certain general topic. Then, new words learned are placed on the wall or when needed, and students can see them visually every day. This needs to also require students to use the words in multiple ways and continued use over periods of time. Through all of this, students can have a much better time understanding math concepts in the long run through using the language in more ways than just drilling vocab and then leaving it at that, expecting students to understand the math concepts just through vocabulary. This isn't true at all, especially for ELLs. They need to learn the math language through communication, and vocabulary is only the start. Instead of only focusing on vocabulary, math teachers need to expand instruction in many ways. One way is to find out the knowledge the students have with math instruction. By knowing how students learn and seeing what math content they know, it can help teachers know what is needed to be refreshed and what can be expanded on, and if new material can be added. This will especially help with English language learners, but can sometimes be difficult because ELLs aren't given the test in their own language, so that the test can be comprehended better by the student and show the true knowledge the student possesses. This leads to the next part of helping to expand instruction from just vocabulary. We as teachers need to know the ELL population in our classroom and their language history. We need to be sure to treat language as a resource and not an obstacle. By doing this, we need to be sure to address more than just vocab, and support the ELL's participation in math discussions as they learn English. To help ensure participation, teachers need to draw on multiple resources available in the classroom, such as objects, drawings, graphs, and gestures. Another resource that some teachers don't consider is the child's home language and experiences outside of school, which leads us to the next tool to help expand math from vocabulary. By keeping in contact with the student's family and community, teachers and the school as a whole can connect the students' family lives and experiences and embed them into teaching and curriculum. This will help ELLs to feel more comfortable and at home in the classroom. Although not only needed vocabulary in the math classroom, teachers also need to consider each student's diverse learning styles and multiple intelligences. To help to be able to conquer these two items, teachers need to be sure to include frequent use of models, make music as a motivator, use things such as mind maps, poster walks, and word walls, as well as teachers need to include vivid adjectives and present key vocab and their cognates, presenting in different forms. In order to connect with math content, with language, we need to focus on students' mathematical reasoning, not accuracy in using language. We also need to shift the focus of math discourse practices and move away from simplified views of language. That is, don't just use vocabulary to get the language across. It is also important to recognize and support ELL or students to engage with the complexity of the language in math classrooms. I think that students or ELLs would be more likely to participate with complex language if they knew that they wouldn't get in trouble for mispronunciation and wouldn't be judged. To help accomplish this, teachers should explain to students the rules of the classroom and that students should be respectful and helpful. By treating everyday language and experiences as resources, not obstacles, teachers can show their students that they care and are here to help with whatever information is handed to them. Last but not least, teachers need to uncover math in what students say and do. This goes along with math being part of our daily lives, which will be talked about later in this video. I would like to end my myth and put it to rest by quoting another segment of Judith from her article, Understanding Language. One goal of math instruction for ELLs is to support all students, regardless of proficiency in English, through discussions that focus on important math concepts and reasoning, not pronunciations, vocab, and low-level linguistic skills.
Most people think that math vocabulary is easy to learn and students won't have a problem, while ELL students will have a problem with math vocabulary because of some of the multiple meanings some math terms have that even don't relate to math. When you talk about a certain vocabulary word, some students will understand what you're talking about, but others, like ELLs, will have to think of the literal definition, not the math definition, because that's all they're used to. We need to make sure that we break down the word to make sure that every single student will understand what the definition means. Some examples of these vocabulary misconceptions are the bigger half. Although a seemingly innocent phrase, one can easily determine that the notion of the bigger half is mathematically erroneous. By definition, two halves must be each the same quantity, so there is no such thing as the bigger half. This error is more likely to occur at home rather than at school, when a scenario such as when a parent instructs an older child to give a younger child the bigger half of the cookie. Regardless of the location, the term is an example of how easy the mathematical meaning of a concept can be inadvertently eroded. Students already have enough difficulty with topics such as fractions, without further confusing the issue with Clara's statements such as this one. Another one is carry. The term carry has long been repeated in numerous elementary and middle school classrooms and is firmly entrenched in the vocabulary of traditional math instruction. The confusion of the students lies in the standard definition of carry as an action of holding and transporting an object, as in carrying a bag of groceries to the car. Thus, the term cannot confuse students, but also the term not only can confuse students, but also fails to explain what is actually happening mathematically. It's a missed opportunity, really. Fortunately, new curricula and texts are changing the terminology of addition and replacing carry with the terms such as grouping. Contextual examples such as converting 16 pennies to 1 dime and 6 pennies would add clarity in those scenarios. The use of the term borrow, which is another term in subtraction, is the same as the use of carry in addition, with both terms being equally entrenched in traditional instruction. The confusion of students again lies in the standard definition of the term. In the standard use, to borrow suggests that one receives something with the implied or expression intent of returning the same item to the lender. So if we borrow a 10 in a subtraction problem, are we supposed to pay it back at some point? Some changes are slowly being made into the new curricula and text to replace the use of borrow and incorporate the converting and regrouping in the basic operations of addition and subtraction. Another term is cancel. The term cancel, especially as it pertains to simplifying a fraction or rational expression, is essentially problematic because it implies that something is deleted, eliminated, or otherwise brought to nothing. In science, one of the laws of conservation states that energy is neither created nor destroyed in a system, but rather changed form. This basic idea has a parallel in mathematics. Quantities and expressions can be changed to equivalent forms that may appear different and give the illusion that something was eliminated. The reality is that most mathematical contexts where something appears to have been canceled are in fact instances where an expression can simplify to either 1 or 0. The insidious idea of cancellation is connected to the overuse of shortcuts. Another term is reduce. It is probably a safe assumption that, with rare exceptions, almost all adults who went through the U.S. school system were taught to reduce fractions. The careless use of the term reduce in mathematics is in direct contradiction to the standard English definition, to make smaller. Teachers are not making any favors by continuing to use this term when discussing fractions and rational expressions. They are trying to change it from reducing to simplifying. Another term is goes into. The notion of goes into is probably the most senseless use of language in mathematics instruction. In English class, elementary students learn that a person goes into a room or a bear goes into a cave. Then in math class, these small students are told like 2 goes into 8 and 3 doesn't go into 10. Students can get confused when fractions are also involved. So what we need to do is we need to try to make sure we break down these terms so that way then the students can better understand the words and not get confused like they have been.
Math is all practice and drill. Math is mostly abstract, which means existing in thought or as an idea, but not having a physical or concrete existence. So it is the job of the teacher to make connections between the concrete and the abstract. Concrete means existing in a material or physical form, real or solid. One way for teachers to make this connection is by the use of manipulatives in the classroom. Manipulatives help because the best way to make the connections is not to just have the students do practice and drill. It was found that vocabulary drill is not the most effective instructional practice, so in math, the teacher needs to keep that in mind when teaching. In order to help with the language in a mathematics classroom, it is important to use concrete objects so students can be engaged in hands-on activities that not only make the comprehension of abstract math concepts easier, but are also enjoyable. A better way for students to learn is with searching for, finding, and using patterns in learning the basic number combinations and arithmetic strategies. When searching and finding patterns in mathematics, the students need to focus more on the process and the understanding behind the specific mathematical concept rather than the right answer. As a mathematics teacher, it is your responsibility to support all students regardless of proficiency in English through discussions that focus on important math concepts and reasoning, not pronunciations of vocabulary and low-level linguistic skills. In order to not do just drill and practice and focusing on vocabulary, a teacher can encourage his or her students to draw, translate, and visualize word problems. This would be a check for understanding of the student's grasp on the specific mathematical idea and less about the language the students know or uses. Another beneficial way to learn mathematics is to have a discussion and work with someone else. A way to have a discussion would be for a teacher to focus on discourse practices and move away from simplified views of language. Discourse means communication of thought by words, talk, or conversation. Jeff Zires has a graphic organizer called Math Paired Conversation Protocol. This tool is great especially for an ELL student, but will help all of your students break down math concepts and get a better understanding. This graphic organizer would also help include math discourse in the classroom. This requires 2 or more students, and they start off by discussing with each other what is being asked and what the problem is. The next step is to have each student come up with an estimate for the answer, and then the partners or group discuss all the estimations. The students can use visuals, drawings, charts, symbols, and calculations to show how they came up with their answer, but then discuss which method they would recommend. Then the students discuss the connections between the 2 methods. The students come up with one way to solve the problems like the problem they just did. Lastly, the students write a similar problem together and then solve it. After the pair does this step, they can share with others in the class. When teaching basic math facts like times tables or addition and subtraction, you learn the facts through 3 stages. The stages are 1. Procedural knowledge of figuring out facts. 2. Strategies for remembering facts based on relationships. And 3. Automaticity in math facts or declarative knowledge. The first stage has been characterized as understanding or conceptual or procedural.
This is a stage where the child must count or do successive addition or some other strategy to figure out the answer to a fact. The second stage has been characterized as relating or as strategies for remembering. The third stage of learning math facts has been called mastery or overlearning, or the development of automaticity. In this stage, children develop the capacity to simply recall the answers to facts without resorting to anything other than the direct retrieval of the answer. In one study by Carnine and Stein in 1981, found that instructed with a strategy for remembering facts learned, a set of 24 facts with higher accuracy than students who were presented with the facts to memorize with no aids to remembering. Practice should not be thought of as rote repetition, but as deliberate, goal-directed rehearsal paired with reflection on problem-solving processes. Teachers should always design practice activities with the goal of transferring knowledge to new and more complex problems in mind. Instruction should provide opportunities for students to actively use mathematical language to communicate about and negotiate meaning for mathematical situations. To summarize, that it means that we do not want our students to be able to just do a set of problems, but it is all about the understanding of mathematics, which does not come solely from drills. In order to help shift the focus from just drills, a teacher can draw on multiple resources available in the classroom. A goal in mathematics classroom is for all students to become at least proficient in the subject. Proficient levels of performance go beyond the accuracy or quality of an acquired skill to encompass sufficient speed or the quantity of performance. For a person to develop fluency and accuracy, the student needs to understand. Some children, despite a great deal of drill and practice on math facts, fail to develop fluency or automaticity with the facts. Because of this, the teacher needs to use other ways to try to teach the same concept. Therefore, mathematics is not just practice and drill, but needs to be a variety of instructions and learning.
Students are constantly asking the teacher, "When will I use this again?" These students think math is not relevant to their lives, which is our next myth. Well, math can be found in a lot of areas of everyday life. I'm sure you use math on a daily basis without even knowing it. Math is used in sports with statistics, making comparisons between players, and the win-loss records. Math is used when you go grocery shopping by comparing prices and weights. Also, if you have those handy-dandy coupons, then those involve using math. Following recipes is math. Rolling a dice and playing cards both deals with probability, which is math. As you can see, math is used all around us in everyday life. So I ask, why do students think math is irrelevant to their lives? Well, teachers do not make that connection when they are teaching math, so students do not see all of its applications. Usually, teachers argue by saying that they make this connection using word problems. However, the connection is not made in the word problems because the language has failed. Cindy Brandt states that the disconnect is a result of word problems not being realistic but rather stylized representations of hypothetical experiences, which results in students not seeing them as math problems. Just because the problem is using an airplane or train or apples doesn't make the problem have real-world value. Coulier and Thomas uncovered a core list of principles that promote the achievement of high academic standards for English language learners. Principle 3 on the list states that lessons need to provide experiences that show how rules, abstractions, and verbal descriptions are drawn from and applied in the everyday world. Students need to be able to make the connection between math and the real world in order to have the opportunity to apply the skills and have meaningful experiences. This shows that teachers need to make word problems more concrete in order to make the connection with their students. Manipulatives, up-to-date statistics, and cultural connections will help students to be able to understand the language in the word problems and its connection to the real world. Word problems in their own pose a challenge to all students, not just English language learners. Students need to transfer the language used in the word problems into math concepts involving numbers. If we look at the example, Timmy removes 24 crayons from a box. There were originally 36 crayons in the box. How many crayons are left in the box? In order to solve this problem, students need to know that the word left means to subtract the two values. Also, students need to know the vocabulary words originally and removes, which are tier 2 words, in order to understand which number would come first in the subtraction problem and which one would come second. As you can see, there's a lot of language that students need to understand in order to successfully transfer the words into math concepts. Students need to understand multiple key words and phrases that indicate the varying operations. For example, increase by, more than, combine, total of, and sum all indicate the operation of addition. Here's a table containing the other words and phrases used to indicate the operations of subtraction, multiplication, division, and equals. As you can see, each operation has multiple words and phrases meaning the same thing. Students need to recognize and understand these key words and phrases in order to translate the language of word problems into mathematical representations. The typical structure of word problems is scenario, information, then question. This seems pretty straightforward, but the language used in each part can make solving the problem challenging to any student. In many cases, the information in the problem is unreasonable in relation to the scenario. Then, the information contains unclear verb tenses, and some information is irrelevant to the question being posed. Students need to stifle through and make sense of the language before they can attempt to transfer it into math expressions. In order to understand why students are struggling with the language and word problems, teachers should have students create their own word problems. The teacher can examine these to provide insight into the features in word problems that students are not aware of or having problems with in regard to both the math task and the language and form being used. In order for students to stop thinking that math is not relevant to their lives, teachers need to be cautious of the language being used in their word problems in order to make a meaningful connection of math to the real world. Word problems pose many challenges to students, so teachers need to teach students the language being used and structures beforehand. This will allow students to have a greater chance to succeed in the classroom and make language development.
Instead of eradicating ghosts like in the popular movie Ghostbusters or busting common myths on the TV show Mythbusters, the math nerds of EDU 350 have busted 4 of the common myths about mathematics.
Math is just vocabulary and that's all you need. It is a common misconception that all you need in math is vocabulary. When it comes down to it, vocabulary is just a start. In order to understand and comprehend math content, tools such as communication, type of background in math, and culture all play a factor in how a student will perform in the math classroom.
Vocabulary misconceptions. Most people think that vocabulary is all the same when it comes to math, but in reality, it doesn't work like that. There's so many words that have different meanings in math than the literal meanings. Words like the bigger half, borrow, carry, cancel, reduce, goes into, etc. have multiple meanings. We need to make sure that we clearly explain the vocabulary words to make sure that each student is able to understand the word.
Math is all practice and drill. Mathematics is better learned from making connections between the abstract math concepts and concrete ideas. Students need to understand what's really going on when they do a problem and not just how to get an answer.
The myth, math is not relevant to our lives, can now be put to rest. Math is found in many areas of everyday life, including sports, grocery shopping, cooking, rolling a dice, and playing cards. Students are not aware of all its applications because teachers do not make that connection. Teachers need to do a better job of utilizing the language and pre-teaching the language structures and forms and word problems in order for students to make the connection from the classroom to home.
2 can also be written as what is shown on the PowerPoint and all stand for the number 2. But we have shown how mathematics is not universal. The numbers might be able to be translated into different languages, but the meaning, symbols, and processes differ from country to country.